It's been said that you can tell a lot about a person from the things they own. But what happens when the person doesn't own very much, or when 70 years have passed? This history will tell the story of a Slovak immigrant in the back of the yards in Chicago, using both her words and some of the possessions she saved from the time period. Anna Miga is my great-aunt, my grandmother's older sister. She saw things and experienced things we can't even imagine today. She was born in a small village in Czechoslovakia on October 23, 1920, and named for her mother. Anne's family was made up of her father, Nicholas, her mother, Anna, and her two youngest sisters, Mary and Helen. Helen was born in 1932, and Helen born in 1934. It was always Anne's job to watch her sisters, which made her feel like the substitute mom. She used to scoff at them and say, "Oh, you girls," like they were too silly for her. Anna and her mother came to Chicago in 1928 after her father had saved up enough money to bring them to him. Her earliest memory of him was when they were reunited. She said he had gotten so fat, he had this big belly. She was always her father's little girl, his favorite, and she adored him. She always held on to one of his Gillette razors from 1941. He used it for years, and after he passed in the 1960s, she couldn't bear to part with it. When Anne came to Chicago, she was 8 years old and didn't know any English. So when she began school at Hedges Elementary School at 48th and Winchester, she was pushed back to first grade. She was so embarrassed because she could barely fit in the little desks. Her teacher was very short-tempered and always yelled at her. It took many years for Anne to realize that her teacher had to put in extra time just to teach her English. She dreaded school so much, and because of her tuberculosis when she was 15, that she only went to school until 8th grade. She regretted it her whole life that she didn't have a better education and tried everything she could to make up for it. In 1936, after years of saving, her father purchased a home for $1,700. It was a two-flat on 2032 West James Street in the back of the yards. It was built in 1898 and had no front door. A house like this one was considered a fire trap. They were built dangerously close together, which contributed to a lot of the health problems in the area. It had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a parlor. In the kitchen, there was a sink with only cold water, a gas stove, and a potbelly stove that burned coal. They had a small refrigerator well stocked with ice. For furniture, they had a table, 3 chairs, and a built-in china cabinet. The kitchen became the living room for them in the winter because of the heat from the potbelly stove. Anne and her sisters slept in the bedroom just off the kitchen where it was warmer. They didn't have very much in the home because they were so poor. Anne's favorite meal was kapusta, which is sauerkraut and boiled potatoes, although that is also what the family ate all the time. They had very little meat, almost never, and when they did, it was either bacon or sausage. There was also a garden in the back of their home where they grew cucumbers, tomatoes, cabbage, and potatoes. That's what they ate, along with bread, butter, and milk. Anne's family always had milk. Mr. Novak, the milkman, was a very nice man and always gave them a discount during the Depression. When Anne became a teenager, she was so afraid of getting fat that she'd pick out the little bits of fat, even in salami. Throughout the Depression, her father had a difficult time keeping a job. He drifted a lot. For a time, he worked for the WPA, repairing and cleaning streets in Chicago. He also worked as a night watchman at a railroad and a few other places around the neighborhood. Papa did the cooking for the family, she said, because it was Mama who kept the family together with her job. She worked downtown at 606 South State Street, washing floors. She always had a job during the Depression, and it was she who held everything together. Anne and her family were Byzantine Catholic and attended Mass at St. Mary's Byzantine Catholic Church at 50th and Seeley. From midnight on Saturday night on, they drank only water because of communion. Then they'd walk to church, and afterwards they'd go home and eat. They'd try to have meat, gravy, and boiled milk every Sunday. Anne loved the skin of the milk. Because it was the Sabbath, they didn't do anything at all. Anne was religious throughout her whole life, collecting small guidebooks from churches. Some of the ones she kept from the Depression are called Devotion for the Conversion of the Erring, Novena Devotions to the Holy Spirit, and How to Avoid Purgatory. She was also a member of various Slovak groups, one of which she still has the due-book, dating as early as March 1941. From roughly 1900 to the 1930s, the back of the yards had one of the highest death rates in the city due to the poor housing and low wages. In 1935, at the age of 15, Anne came down with tuberculosis and was submitted to a sanitarium for 2 years. The doctors wanted to remove her lung, and her mother refused because of all the children that had had their lungs taken out actually did know better. Instead, she snuck cod liver oil in with her when she visited to make her daughter stronger. Anne's room in her hospital was near the mortuary, and she would see all of the dead being carted off there every day. It affected her so negatively for her whole life, watching the girls around her, when she had become friends with, die, and wondering when it would be her turn. To keep her mind busy, she asked her mother for a French book, since she was unable to go to school. She had a hard time pronouncing the words and ended up quitting, although she kept the book and gave it to me when I began to take French in high school. After 2 years, Anne survived, crediting to this day the cod liver oil that her mother used to bring her. After she returned home, she floated around the home for a while, her parents insisting that she stay home until they were sure she was strong enough to go to work. Anne was intended to a man to be married, but because of the tuberculosis, the family backed out, even though she survived and was healthy. People around her feared that they, too, would get sick. Between Herbert Hoover and Al Smith in 1928, the Migas liked Hoover. They thought he was the greatest thing, although they didn't talk about politics very much because they didn't understand it. They didn't read the newspaper or understand the structure of politics or the government in America. In Czechoslovakia, if you disagreed with the government, you disappeared. Your neighbors would sell you out. So when they came to Chicago, they kept their heads down. They were afraid that someone would be listening in and that they would be arrested. They were suspicious of even their own people. When the stock market crashed, Anne was 9 years old, and her family wasn't very worried about it. They had very little money anyway. What Anne liked about it was that she was able to go on to Ashland Avenue to the dime store and buy a new dress for 3 cents. They had lost a little bit of money in the bank, but that was all. They had heard about the crash on the radio, but they didn't understand what it meant. And because they didn't always have a lot of food, Anne would go down to the Ukrainian bakery to beg for the old bread, but she would never get any. But overall, the family adjusted and lived the way they always had, which was poor. There was just less, but that was all right because they'd never had very much to compare it to. In the back of the yard's New City area, unemployment had climbed to at least 29% by early 1931, which led to a change of heart for Anne and her family. So in 1932, when Hoover and Roosevelt were running against each other, the Migas supported Roosevelt because he promised them jobs. And when Roosevelt closed the banks, the Migas weren't afraid because they had little money in the bank. They didn't understand the long-term ramifications of it. When Nicholas first came to the United States, he didn't really know about banks, so he kept putting money in with this man that he had known from the town in Czechoslovakia. And one day the man left with his money. So Nicholas had to begin saving all over again to bring over his wife and daughter. They were mistrustful of the banks already and tended to keep their money with them at home. They figured if someone from their town could take their money, how could they trust anyone else? But they loved the New Deal because Nicholas got a job, and it seemed like everything would get better. In 1933, the World's Fair was held in Chicago. Anne took the bus to the fairgrounds like she did most everything. The bus was their form of entertainment. She and her mother would ride up and down for hours just to see the sights. But she took the bus to the World's Fair, but couldn't afford the entrance fee, so she just looked in. She saw the soda fountains at Walgreens, and she was very excited by it. She'd never seen anything like it. They had 200-foot-long soda fountains at the World's Fair. Anne's first job was at Crane Company on Kedzie Avenue in 1941, when Crane got large arms orders from the Navy, sometimes in sums of greater than $21,000 a week. Anne was a riveter there. She had a hard time with the job because of all the dust and smoke in the air, and she worked there until 1945 when they laid everyone off. Her second job was at Billings Hospital at the University of Chicago. She says she started working there in 1939 as a nurse's aide. She made 60 cents an hour and worked here the rest of her life. Although the dates conflict, I can't quite make sense of which is right. The dates, when compared with her retirement papers, are correct here. She loved the University of Chicago job. 48 families of the 100 were classified as well organized. Characteristics of these families were family pride and solidarity, personal adjustments of parents to each other, to their children, saving for children's education, and coordinated efforts to buy a home. This quote from a 1938 Chicago Daily Tribune article sums up the Miga family so well. Nicholas and Anna were committed to their family. It's easy to see when, despite the hardships they endured, that they were able to keep their eldest daughter from working while she was recovering from tuberculosis. Anna was much older than most kids when she began working, and it's because her parents worked hard to make that happen.